Strike came out nearly 100 years ago in 1925. The film depicts an uprising by factory workers during the pre-revolutionary Russia. It was the first film by the renowned Soviet director Sergei Eisenstein, who was guided in his first and in future projects by the less famous but equally influential cinematographer Edouard Tissé. Black and white and silent, the movie is characterized by its lack of individual protagonists and by its use of montage editing, which would become the basis of the Soviet montage movement that occurred from 1925 to 1933. The film has a complex narrative and structure, and to understand it fully, we must engage in a closer look of the history of Russia during this decisive period and analyze the language of the movie and its deeper meanings. The history of Russia during the 20th century is infamously tumultuous. The beginning of the century was marked by the rule of Tsar Nicholas II, who was crowned to an already dissonant population and whose failures would augment his people's animosity towards him to the point of no revolution. The humiliation of Russia during the Russian-Japanese War was the recurring use of state force against the people, and his hostility towards the parliament that was created to keep his power in check are among these failures. Finally, the argumentation of misery added by the famine and deaths caused in World War I in Russia accumulated in the February Revolution of 1917, where the Romanov monarchy was finally overthrown. A provisional government was placed to deal with the fallout, but this was also overthrown in what is known as the October Revolution, conducted by the Bolsheviks and led by Vladimir Lenin. This would result in the Russian Civil War that took place from 1917 to 1920. The war years took a heavy toll on Russian cinema. Film companies fled following the revolution, taking a significant portion of the equipment with them. Electricity was scarce throughout the country, and what little there was rarely went to the theaters. The majority of films made during this time were propaganda, known as agiti. It would not be until the new economic policy of 1921, which allowed a temporary market-style policy to be practiced in the country, that equipment and films would finally be imported back into the Soviet Union. However, domestic production of films was still in a poor state, and the majority of films shown were imported. In 1923 emerged the first Soviet film that rivaled the appeal of foreign films in the country during this period, but it was still part of a narrow minority. By 1924, still 95% of movies shown in theaters were imported. There was a growing concern about the significance of this, as foreign films were considered ideologically damaging, and there was also an increasing desire to make the Soviet film industry profitable. The investments made throughout 1924 to act against these concerns opened the doorway for the funding of Eisenstein's first movies by the government-run film organization Goskino, the very first of these being Strike. A patriotic Bolshevik, Sergei Eisenstein had studied engineering before he enlisted in the Red Army at the onset of the war. Instead of spending time in the battlefield, however, he was working on making posters for a theatrical advocacy company. After the war, he dedicated himself to theater, directing experimental plays where he could test his artistic theories. In the years after the revolution, art was increasingly seen from a constructivist perspective, which means that it was seen more as a tool rather than art. Constructivist theory matched well with the Soviet Union's focus on industrial output, and here is where the name montage comes from, as the word in French meant assembly of a machine. In the cold years where the film possibilities were slim to none, artists discussed the potential of film through magazines and other means. Eisenstein's artistic goals matched the constructive attitude about film, as well as film matching as a good tool to realize his artistic aspirations. He soon realized that film would be the best form to explore his unorthodox theories of art and exhibit his Bolshevik ideology. He would go on to become the most influential Soviet filmmaker, but it all started with his first film, Strike. Serious trigger warning for some real gore of an animal being slaughtered. There is one scene in Eisenstein's Strike that essentially not only captures the entire message of the film, but also the entire goal of the Soviet montage movement, using the relationship between two images in order to create a catalyst for change. The scene is titled Carnage, and the audience is presented with two separate scenes that intercut with one in the other. The first is the slaughter of a bull, and the second is the massacre of the striking labor force. These seemingly two unrelated events that have no impact on each other create a major impression within the audience. The intercutting of the two scenes leads the audience to assume an association between them, and the audience interprets the meaning using their own intuition. This scene serves as a textbook metaphor, which says the striking labor force is being slaughtered like a bull. Through this, the film compares the treatment of the worker to that of an animal. Therefore, the audience then asks themselves, why are things like this, and what can we do to change it or stop it from happening again? Now the audience is turned into bystanders of this horrific event and left to decide for themselves what to do next. Do they comply or bring about change? This is the true power of film editing. Through that dilemma, the audience is called to action by the art, which is exactly what montage filmmaking sought to achieve. The evidence can be found in the way that it makes the viewers feel nothing but sympathy for the oppressed workers. Despite any biased feeling towards the subject matter, movement as a whole, or the government which funded the film, it cannot be denied that the emotions that this scene evokes within the viewers are human and real, as if the audience were to witness the scene themselves. Sergei Eisenstein does a brilliant job of portraying his political ideas through cinematic techniques within his film Strike. His iconic montage editing and progressive theme makes the film exceptionally persuasive in terms of a propaganda film. Strike was an extremely political progressive film where they were fully aware of how toxic capitalism is. The idea of corruption within capitalism is clear with the murder of every worker, but the cut between the workers' lifeless bodies and their former boss smiling and laughing, and the killing of a small child during the riot helps emphasize this idea. The smiling and laughing of the boss, or king as they call him in the film, and the killing of the child shows how capitalism is unsympathetic to anyone who it hurts, even an innocent child. This is a brilliant move by Eisenstein in the film and has definitely helped persuade his audience into believing his ideas. But the thing is, not everything Eisenstein did for this movie was brilliant. Strike has always had a very strong and solid theme throughout the film, but there were also some things that it took away from the message rather than adding to it. For example, the comedy aspect of the film, we believe, wasn't the best choice in a film of this nature. Although it can be beneficial to add lighter-hearted aspects to films, it was a bit unnecessary within Strike. Take the children who were dancing on the table, for instance. This part of the film is meant to be comedic, but has no real substance to it. If we were to take it out of the film entirely, the plot wouldn't change at all. Sometimes comedic aspects within movies just aren't the right call, like Strike. Another thing that might detract from the experience is that the movie is ultimately very contemporary to its time. It is inevitable that a movie that is both old and foreign, but worth advising. On a blind first watching, it might be difficult to follow certain aspects of the plot and understand the significance of some scenes. The message of oppression of workers under the iron boot of the bourgeoisie is universal, and especially with its wordless montage editing. But a lot of the scenes in between will leave viewers that have scarce knowledge of the situation in Russia scratching their heads.